Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I want to spin you a tale on how we're going to weave cryptocurrencies into modern acceptance of every single human being on this planet. Whether you're banked or unbanked, it's going to culminate into this new system. And we got a timeline for that too. It's the exact same timelines as the intensification of the weather patterns, absolutely decimating the crops, either the harvesting, the yields, or the planting times. This consumer economy is based on disposable income. That is soon going to be drying up as food prices increase, maybe double, maybe triple, and maybe 5 times. But when people divert their spending into higher priced food because nobody cannot eat. At the same time as the entire financial system around the world collapses, there's going to need to be a replacement. And there already is. They spent 350 years setting up this financial system as we know it in the global level. They're not going to let it go to zero. They've already found a replacement. This cryptocurrency timeline, the implementation specifically of what every person on earth knows how to buy it, sell it, trade it, send it, and receive it. Now, how fast is this going to unfold? Well, it's going to unfold at the exact same speed that the crop losses are occurring. Now, we have a perfect roadmap right here with the research that Zarkova, Shepard, and Popov put out. If you're not familiar with the grand solar minimum, it's a cycle that occurs in our sun every 380 years or so. It affects food production. There's also more cosmic rays, which create greater cloud cover, more volcanism. This all adds into an albedo effect, unusual weather patterns, drops in temperature, heavy rains, snows, blizzards, all out of season, by the way. And how quickly is all this going to unfold? Well, let's take a look. This is what I want to weave all these parts together. And I do want to give a shout out to Crypto. Thanks for all the videos that you've been putting out, been following closely. JSnip4, thank you for sharing all the new information about the ICOs that are coming out. Great of you to share. Cliff High, thank you for the reports. I get a lot out of those. And I've noticed more and more in the lexicon, they're talking about mini ice age and grand solar minimum. Also, the crew over at Suspicious Observers. Now we're starting to put all these points together with science and the new economy. Here's the rollout for the next 5 years. I think it's going to go like this. I think you're going to find some very interesting ideas in here. And I hope that after you watch the video, we can compare notes, and others of you out there that have sort of areas that are not connected, you might find a commonality point now that you could add that last piece that would make a complete puzzle. I encourage you to watch. Please share your thoughts. All the links are below so you can check out and backtrack and do your own research after the video. I've divided this video into 3 different parts that weave and culminate into one final idea. Part 1 is about the digitization of physical assets and how ACC Chain and the Chinese government's 5-year plan moving forward with cryptocurrency have started with tea, alcohol, and real estate on the blockchain, but they're quickly moving over into the grains and softs on 60,000-ton deliveries with Corn Coin. Second part of the video, I wanted to talk about what the grand solar minimum is and the effects it had on China and why they're so far behind the 8 ball right now, trying to get everything set up and running on this blockchain to take delivery of agricultural commodities. Now, China's not only affected, we as a global community are going to be drastically affected in our agricultural output and the yields coming off of traditional agricultural areas planet-wide as we get into a cooler time during this grand solar minimum starting right now. And part 3 is about how, with the timeline of the grand solar minimum intensification, the global acceptance of digital currency will be rolled out, and how this all culminates with smart contracts and how we're going to trade, buy, and sell food and agricultural commodities when the economy crashes because people are spending double or triple on what they're doing for food prices right now. Now, since we're going to be talking about China, I thought a small introduction of the experience I had living and starting a business in China would give some credence to what I say. Back in 2008 and 2009, I was working with Dow Energy, Dow Nongyuan, which was an algae biodiesel company, and we were trying to drive down installation costs by using a modular bag system that floated on fish farm water surfaces, not using land. After that chapter ended in China, I was still in Asia, so I was brought on as a consultant in Myanmar to facilitate funding for an algae spirulina farm that also encompassed rural development and how the farmers could use some simple machinery to move a more valuable product either to the river for transport or up to the rail lines. That in turn led me to OGS Coffee in the Shan State exporting. That's me on the right there. And that's how the Adapt 2030 channel started, when I started to see all these cold weather losses in Myanmar in the coffee plantations. Now let's talk about the food price rise timeline and how this cryptocurrency is going to replace our current economic system as food prices get so expensive that the rest of the economy crashes. And since the fiat currencies of the world will have no confidence behind them, we'll need to move to a different system, specifically blockchain, to buy, sell, and trade on a global level or international, because nobody will trust letters of credit. Probably in around 2018 at the end or 2019, you'll start to see some real effects into the global economy. Now, there's been a lot of talk about ACC Chain these last couple of days. So since I do read some Chinese and I speak Chinese, I actually went into not only the English version of their chart, but also the Chinese end of it with my friend. I wanted to get into a real deep explanation of what ACC Chain is. It's actually called the Asset Collection Chain. The logo is pretty interesting, and there's a lot of tie-ins with this Economist cover from 1988 about get ready for a world currency. And when we look at the current logo of ACC compared to the head of the eagle, there's some interesting correlation. So then what I did is I took that logo, I inverted it, and then cropped it to get a mirror image. And on the bottom there, I'll let you draw your own conclusion if you consider that something similar to what the logo would be on the coin from 1988. Also, the trust machine. When you see this Bitcoin spinning around the world in a mechanized fashion as a bicycle gear hub, if you will. Another interesting point was when I was inverting and mirror those, I couldn't get that mirror effect without leaving the dot in the center there. I'll let you draw your own conclusions on the symbology associated with this logo. Now, the whole purpose of this video was about the cryptocurrency market capitalization increasing lockstep with the grand solar minimum intensification. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the grand solar minimum, hold on just a minute. I'll explain that in great detail in part 2. But smart contracts are going to be the wave of the future, guaranteed. That's why I am so into it right now. I am actually studying Solidity, how to program for specifically agricultural smart contracts. And as with everything, it's a continual learning phase. This is running off of Ethereum. And if you want to learn more, you can go to the Ethereum developers community to learn a little more about Solidity. And the smart contract is a one-size-fits-all. It can really take place of any types of insurance premiums, financial derivatives, delivery contracts, property law, credit, financial services, legal processes, even some crowdfunding involved in that. Now, as the confidence of our fiat system collapses along with the real economy as people spend double or triple on food, there's going to be a lack of confidence in getting paid when you're shipping something internationally. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a swift move over into these types of blockchain contracts that are going to be on-chain assets. And again, this is the whole thing about digitizing a commodity. You predefine the contract, you enter your parameters, the fields, and then the event that happens, whether it's delivered, not delivered, moisture content, tonnage, insect damage, there's just a whole bunch of different fields to enter there. This is held until the terms of the contract are validated when the conditions are met, and then it's settled. And what I like so much about these smart contracts is the scam out in Asia is once you send something over, let's say a breakbulk cargo, 60,000 tons, could be iron ore, it could be wheat, it could be corn, anything. They'll refuse delivery at port and they'll say, no, we don't want it, take it back. But you're out running 45,000 US dollars a day to keep that ship anchored. Well, if you're going to write this contract so that if they refuse delivery and
all of the event triggers are validated, that wheat is the proper moisture content, that wheat is the correct variety of wheat, the tonnage is correct. And if the purchaser refuses delivery, which they do now a lot to try to drive down price, that executes out in a settlement back to the seller, which will absolutely stop that in its tracks, this game that they play out here routinely of refusing shipments. And this is so correct here. Supply chains are hampered by paper-based systems. These letters of credit are archaic. Moving over to the smart contract, especially when a global financial collapse is happening, guarantees a specific set of outcomes regardless of the underlying asset that you're trading in, whether it be Bitcoin, Ethereum, Steam, Ripple. I don't care what you're going to use as your underlier, but you can still be paid in that, and we don't even have to worry about global fiat issued currency that's paper any longer. We can just move it straight over, and that can be also traded on. And this is where ACC Chain tokens come in. I want to talk about the settlement instruments here, but how they're using underlying asset is T. So you've heard about this and what happened with this T deal. It's been all over the internet. A lot of people talking about they digitize T and then they just leave the story at the end and they don't show you. So Fenghui International Finance, what they did was they set up a series of the Daguan Ts. They have Daguan Qianshui and Daguan Jiaomu, and they have Daguan Jingong. Now, each one of these types of T was also issued with its own individual coin, which was then put out for an ICO. So the Daguan series, this is a special type of T called Pu'er, and it's a time-stamped 2008 Yunnan province T in a warehouse, validated, and the coin's out, and whoever bought in this coin actually owns part of that T. And this second type of Pu'er T, which is in Bingdao Laozhai area in Yunnan province also, this is a separate type of T with its own coin issued for this lot, if you will. And then we have the third type of Pu'er, 2009, Jingong. And all they're doing is really just going through and issuing a regional token for each one of these. So this is the breakdown here of TTT wine. So Huayang Capital, they did with this type of liquor, Xiaohongliang Kunzi. And they called it the Jiang coin. Just specifically a token issued by Huayang for this batch lot of their liquor. And as I say, follow the money. So we start tracing back in to see Huayang blockchain is funded by which venture capital fund and which incubator inside China. Now here's where it got gray and dicey in a lot of the videos that I'd seen over the last 3 days. They didn't go so deeply into what the NPC tokens are. Now the NPC is actually a node primary coin. So this is a base underlying asset that can be used to transfer into other types of coins that are issued inside these digitized either tea lots or alcohol lots or real estate that's coming up. So basically it's a third-party storage, authenticated, evaluated, confirmed asset pack, if you will. So they bundled it into something called NPC. But prior to that, what they had created was something called the PEB. It's a different kind of coin which had a digital standard token associated with it as well on a single lot of Tibetan tea. Now they tried to couple NEC and PEB together, but since that time and those ICOs that have run, they've decoupled that. These are what the coins look like. Right side is NPC. Real estate token, RET, we'll come back to that because they did do a real estate run as well on an ICO for real estate in Texas. But I downloaded the NPC white paper, and this node primary coin is supposed to be the supernode home currency inside the AC chain. It's a complete asset digitalization tool. Now this can be used to transition or transfer traditional assets into blockchain. Now I'll get into this in a moment. It's not about buy, sell, trade. This is about movement of your digital currency into other investment plays across this space that's being evolved at the moment, AC Chain. And if we take a look at the NPC token offerings and ICO participants, the trade areas and which regional exchanges these coins are offered on, the one thing you need to get to is actually the underlying asset value. So if we come back over, this is the node primary coin ICO. So if we come all the way over to the right side, you see PEB. And at the time of this ICO, it was 1 equaled 1. And then we move over to 3.5 node primary coins equals 1 AC Chain coin. And then they went with that to 1,300 NPC equals 1 Ethereum. And then it was 15,000 NPC equaled 1 Bitcoin. So I started to trace down where these coins were traded over here in Asia and where the ACC is being offered. Can you trace the money? Where's it coming from? Where is it going to? So the first stop is Loicoin. And you notice right away PEB and AC Chain are on the Korean exchange. This is all pegged to the Korean won. So AC Chain currently at 350 won to the dollar is about 30 cents US or so. But the PEB has been discontinued and it's so low value right now anyway that they've pretty much gone away with this. Then I also found it listed over in Japan in Nira X. But there it's slightly higher price because it's 47 yen, which is creeping toward 40 cents. Now the original thing that kicked this all off was the Ning Hong Gan Hong tea. And I did actually jump into the guidebook and the product traceability, which brought me to that first image that you saw there of the tea. Everything is really well done, and all the images are there so you can compare tea lots and numbers. The Jiangxi Ninghong group was responsible for putting this very first one together. I think they were just testing the water to see what would happen, and when they issued these coins, if anybody would take it. ICO, just for that first T run, was pushing 40 million US. They've had several since that have raised 15 billion US dollars. It's absolutely a power structure. There's one that's issuing 3 below. There's nothing that's decentralized. There is a flow through to a single issuer that controls the coins below it. And as we look through the international token issuing plan, all of these other 13 underliers here are going to be issued out with coins for an ICO for whatever commodity, equity, or application that it's going to be. But each one of them will be issued in its own coin. And notice that the US Maldives Islands with an equity and a commodity travel coin. And when we talk about large amounts of cash coming in on these ICOs over here through this AC chain, this is billions of dollars here that came through with 345 investors. Okay, you need government approval to do something like that. They're not running this type of money without absolute government intervention, guidance, and approval. And they also put out a news release that the PEB and the NPC are no longer coupled. So when you look on the Jubi exchange, you can find Ant shares are still there, but they're also reorganizing into the NEO coin. One interesting one, Quantum. Keep that in mind as we come back through these news releases here. The next NPC launch was on Wanbi. Pricing there, these are Chinese yuan, so it's about 6.1 yuan to the dollar. So 0.22 of that, it brings it down just into the cents, US cents for one token there. And you can see the volatility isn't as high as what would be coming through Poloniex or Bittrex or something. There's very little movement considering this is a week run here, 8-hour candlesticks. Look at some of the other tokens often on Wanbi. Now please remember, red means positive in Chinese culture, so that 7.5%, that's not a negative, that's a gain for the day. Green is negative. Now back to this whole thing about it requires government approval. And, you know, when I was working on that algae biodiesel, we had approval from the Sichuan government and the Chengdu government. But when we started to produce oil over there from algae, we were closed down because it was not approval from the national government. And we're like, wait, we had a written contract with a joint venture partner from the provincial government in Sichuan. And that was overridden by the national government. So when it comes down to this level where they're bringing in billions of US dollars, they're absolutely working with the Chinese government. Now here's the Chinese government's 5-year blockchain plan to actively push forward. There's a method behind the madness. And notice the time, 2016 to 2020, the PBOC is actually going to issue its own coin. So let's go right back to the AC Chain, operated by Guiyang Blockchain Financial Company. And when you get into the white paper of AC Chain, they break it down into 3 different uses for this underlying object. First one is an equity token. Second one is an application token. It's something like gas for Ether. And then the third one is the commodity token. Now, the internet rumors right now are that these are going to be linked to special drawing rights coin issued off the IMF or the Bank for International Settlements. In my research, I really didn't find anything like that, but knowing China the way I do, they would definitely not be advertising. They would use a third-party intermediary to get everything set up so there would be no attention drawn to that. They will not announce this until it's already up and running, and then they'll announce. There's no way they're going to broadcast their move before this is ready to go. So when you get into all this talk about the supernodes, and then in small print, more supernodes are being discovered. And I'll tell you the next one that's being discovered. It's up in Canada right now. A bit wider out here for you so you can really dig in and take a look at the International Node Exchange. These digital token SDR, international node tokens, can be settled in legal currency. They call it actually SDR digital currency, like special drawing rights. And again, it's a hierarchical chain. There's no decentralization involved in this at all. Each global node will then be established a general ledger token, a GLT for regional circulation, thus subservient to the international node. They have some interesting graphics in the white paper. I've linked everything below so you can backtrack and trace all this down yourself. But it looks like as moving forward, as commodities get digitized inside China, they're going to be using 3 underlying assets. They're going to be using Bitcoin, Ethereum, and this new AC Chain. If it does happen to be pegged somehow to the special drawing rights in IMF and BIS, these are the 3 that are going to move forward. Again, China does not broadcast its moves moving forward. They are secretive until everything is set, and they try to take you by surprise in a chess move. Just the way it is. And then when we look at other types of digitization of assets, let's look at the SRT coin here. This is a U.S. real estate project in Dallas, Texas. This is a smart contract for real estate, literally. Now, BlockGeeks already did a really in-depth post on what smart contracts are and how they work. I encourage you to check out their work. And thank you guys over there at BlockGeeks for putting all this together. And it's moving in the exact same way. And all we need to do, instead of digitize currency, we just need to change that to AC Chain or SRT. And it's the exact same thing happening right now. It's a U.S. real estate project token. And this industry token that was put out for the ICO is labeled RET, real estate token. How original. Visual graphic form. Now, the commercial white paper, which I also downloaded and looked at, classifies RETs as digital asset SDR, special drawing rights, formed by Bitcoin, Ethereum, ACC, and other mainstream digital assets. And at the time of this video, they still haven't fulfilled their ICO funding goals. They've only hit about 1 million of these 50 million SRTs on the ICO goal. How it works is something like this. It's a circulating method. Take a step back to the NPC node primary coin again. These seem to be interchangeable and usability within all these ICOs that the same groups are offering on these assets. That's a key thing to keep in mind as well. But these real estate tokens are broken down into region A, B, C, and D. There's projects going on in Canada as well as the United States. And when taking a look into something like this asset play, exit strategy, you better have one. So I started to look into how can you exit out holding these RET coins. I want to draw your attention down to number 3. All right, number 1 is the regular trading platforms. Number 2 is digital assets. That's fine. We're familiar with those. But here's where it gets into the interesting zone. Once these ICOs are set up, now currently there's only about 30 or 40 of these between the companies that are operating ACC, RET, SRT, and NPC coins. What appears to be happening is the exit strategy allows you to switch assets of either a product or a service or a commodity of equal value within their group of investments that are linked together through all these ICOs and the underlying asset of the commodity or the real estate or the liquor or the tea itself. So if you want to exit out of this real estate play in America, you're able to convert those coins right over into something perhaps on the pu'er tea and one of the feng hui offerings. So you don't actually have to exit out, convert, pay the fees, and then buy back in. You can just slide sideways on that to exit out your position, which I find incredibly interesting. If ACC is already getting to this level where they're able to move from real estate into liquor, into tea, think about this. If you can digitize assets in a different country, you never have to take ownership of that. That's not the point. Let's say you get that house in Dallas, Texas on the ranch that they're buying. The person in China or Asia or wherever you're buying this from has no intention of ever taking delivery or living in that house. They're just using it as an investment vehicle. They're hoping for an increase in value. And when it does, they're going to slide the coin over to the pu'er cha, which continues to increase like fine wine does. These teas have a year to them as well. They increase in value. If you had some pu'er cha from 1997, it's worth its weight in gold now. So you could just jump in between these different investments. So imagine if we can digitize forests, real estate, your labor. How much are you worth? Do you have a master's degree? I can digitize you. What about farm animals? What about farmland? What about fish? What about everything that can be digitized at this point? And my whole thing is about when we get slammed on the economy through this grand solar minimum, they're going to start digitizing food. And they're going to want to take physical delivery of that. But at the point of buy-sell trade on the digital asset itself, everything in the world can be digitized. You can digitize a single tree and buy, sell, and trade it between these different commodity asset classes that you can slide sideways into if you're in the same group. Now here's the next thing to take note of. Over on Wanbi, they also have corn coin, YMC, Yumi, which is the name for corn in Chinese. If they're already trading on the Yumi coin, or the corn coin, they're already starting to digitize the first agricultural commodity assets right here. So Yumi coin currently is really low price. Now I don't know what it's based on. I can't find where the ICO was, who issued this. It's trading on Wanbi, but I don't know the underlier, who's supplying the corn for this contract or this coin to be issued. But it's trading. And when you think about digitizing a harvest from a country, when food gets incredibly expensive, this is the only way it's going to move. The cash you know now will no longer be valid. Nobody will trust it. They're going to move over into the blockchain. So hey, I just created my US wheat coin 2019. That contract owner, that's my Bitcoin address. I can create my own contract for 60,000 tons of US durum wheat in the 2019 season with 10% moisture coming out of Kansas. If they can do it, anybody can do it. If you're running Solidity, you can actually create this. Now you start to see moving forward where it's going. So in my day living in China, I did a little due diligence over there, tracing down some companies. So here we go. I just put that all back into practice again. ACC Chain, how findable are they on the social net inside China that runs parallel to everything outside China? So obviously if you're looking for something on YouTube, you're not going to find it because YouTube's banned in China. You're going to have to go to Youku or Tudo to look for something like this. So I looked up and they have 197 subscribers on a global ICO where it's supposed to be special drawing rights connected to the IMF and the Bank for International Settlements. And I thought, okay, it's YouTube. Perhaps they're difficult to find. So I started running some searches in Chinese, those search terms down there with Tudo and AC Chain. I found one video with 1,200 views 3 months ago. That's it. Talk about flying under the radar. So far under the radar, they're almost unfindable. That is on purpose. That is not that, whoa, they have no exposure. They've gone out of their way to have no exposure. That is the difference. And when you start seeing billboards like this, the world currency, and you know the People's Bank of China is developing their own blockchain to issue their own new digital currency issued from China for world settlement. makes you wonder. Now, the last piece of the puzzle has to be how to facilitate all these transactions. If they're actually going to go global and try to do what all of our modern banking systems do, including BIS and the IMF, they're going to have an enormous network. Enter quantum communications. Now, this is supposedly uncrackable. Absolutely 100% secure communication systems between transmitter, receiver, the quantum key, downstream, upstream, whatever way you're looking at it. We don't even have anything in the United States like this at the level yet. And China's already launching quantum communication satellites. They're actually using entangled photon beams to transmit the information. Now, as with everything on the planet, whoever puts down the first fiber optic cables, telephone cables, electric cables, whatever it is, whoever puts that hard infrastructure in place claims that. And here we go. By the end of August 2017, the Quantum Communications Network will be up and running and operational. It is the essential step toward global scale quantum internet. If you're going to go on a global level with BIS, you're going to need this not only for security, but actual reach and not depending on electrical grids or infrastructure within a country. We're talking about satellite beaming signals. NEO has been rebranded from AntShares. And somehow NEO is now connected with the PBOC developing an Ethereum-based digital currency to replace the yuan. So that comes right back with that government approval process being required. So the Chinese government's not on top of any of this. Visibly, they're not on the table. They are under the table, allowing everybody else to run with this. And they are so silent right now on what's happening. The way they're setting up the Chinese blockchain with the new UN replacement and NEO's platform, it all has to run through a centralized platform. There's no way to connect to it as a third party side chain. You have to connect through their centralized platform, which means it's centralized. It's not decentralized. It's not running without approval or authority from some platform higher up the chain. Digital image here of what it's supposed to go out with the quantum network globally. That circle is over China first. The periphery areas are going to be over in Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, India. And just even as early as April, you could have picked up NEO for cents, literally cents. And now it's at $47. My personal feeling is with all the push behind and all this fervor from the government approval of NEO, it's going to just keep going up in China. And ACChain.org also has some blockchain news on there. And I'm going to have to agree with this here. The global blockchain innovations, the U.S. lags. Europe and China lead. The U.S. is so far behind. Really, they're a decade behind on what's going on. They're going to be left in the dust, literally. Turning into an impoverished nation. If you control the currency, and you can control who buys, sells, trades, this takes us into a whole nother realm. Need to catch up on this. Now you might say, well, how is the Chinese government going to get everybody into a centralized platform? Well, they already are. It's called Tencent. And if you're not familiar with Tencent, it links over 200 social media, fintech, bill payment, group buys, messaging services into its network. You log into one platform and you can access over 200 separate platforms which we need to individually log into. WeChat's part of their platform. And then inside WeChat itself, you can do all these different services or functions. And the global expansion for WeChat itself, notice mainly focused on Asia, but it's also going to be down in South Africa, South America, Mexico. This is all fintech and global payments. Active users of WeChat Pay and QQ Wallet in China. If you're unfamiliar with these payment systems and how people just swipe QR codes to buy like a stick of gum, they're so familiar with it and it's so comfortable to use. This system now scares most people in the US. Chinese are early adopters and everybody accepts it everywhere. And Alipay comprising almost 50% of third-party online payment systems. And not only with the WeChat and all the fintech with Alipay going on, but anything in the Taobao, which is like the eBay, you can buy, sell, trade there. Inside Weibo with all the blogs. Then you get into QQ with the messaging. It's all connected through Tencent. And then Baidu, which is the search engine, which is very similar to what Google would be. It's also tied in. So everything is at a central node point anyway. They're not trying to reteach anybody the wheel. They've already set it up as such. So all they do is slide systems. So instead of using Chinese yuan, they're just going to switch instantly over to the digital new yuan issued by the PBOC, and it's just game on. And nobody even blinked an eye. They're that comfortable with it. Mobile payment system, same thing. It's just up, 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 up. Although the growth rate has decreased, but the amount of users keeps increasing. You can only saturate a market. What? There's 1.4 billion people in China. And if we just go layer on top of layer on top of layer of digital video sharing, messaging, social networking, blogging, photo sharing, online sales platforms, Tencent. So let's follow the money over to Canada. ACC Chain going over to Allcoin Exchange, listing tomorrow, as a matter of fact, on Allcoin. They call it the NASDAQ of global blockchain assets. They only have about 7 listings on there right now. But if you find the parent company of Allcoin, it traces to Cascadia Consumer Electronics Corp. So I try to find some of their board members and then link them back to any of the ACC Chain. Was unsuccessful doing that. Also, looking through their spelling mistakes. If you're going to talk about joining an ICO instruction with a T, you got to ask yourself, you know this is not a native speaker putting this together. This is a Chinese-run site. And the eQuant ICO that's coming out, there's a spelling mistake in assets. It's aseta. I don't know if maybe it's a Spanish or a Portuguese word that they're putting in there. Not sure. So out of all of that you've seen, and knowing the Chinese People's Bank of China involvement and them coming out and working with NEO and quantum communications, and literally how everything is entangled in this whole web in the cryptocurrency space, I'll let you draw your own conclusion. I'm just bringing the information to you. Let's move on to part 2 of the video. Why is China in such rush to get this blockchain up and running? Because every single grand solar minimum through history, their emperors have fallen because of uprisings due to food shortages, and this time it's going to be no different. They can't stop the weather globally. And if you're unfamiliar with what a grand solar minimum is, it's when our sun goes into a lower state of activity and its output electrically and magnetically. This, because it's connected directly to our Earth on these magnetic field lines, and these field-aligned currents has drastic effects on our weather patterns, as well as volcanism, tectonic movement, earthquakes, and you get this whole gamut of effects along with each one of these grand solar minimums. Let's go back 1,000 years in time and we'll take a look at some of the minimums here. Dalton minimum was the one in the 1800s. Maunder minimum, late 1600s to 17. We got the Sporer minimum, the Wolf minimum, going back in time to the Oort minimum around 1050. And the Chinese are very familiar with what happened with their dynastic collapses during each of these. Now, there's so much information out there, and the IPCC keeps pushing over that it's CO2, but when we look back in history, you can see that the areas on our planet have warmed and cooled. Look at the Arctic over the last 2,000 years. It has warmed and cooled long before humans had put any CO2 from burning coal or anything. Let's even go back to the earliest of the 1700s when we were getting steam up and running. Even if you want to go back that far and say that there was input into the atmosphere from producing something from a steam engine. Okay. And you can see again through each regional area, whether it be the Arctic, Europe, Asia, North America, Australasia, which includes New Zealand, Australia, islands down there, South America, and Antarctica. Look how warm it was 1,200 years ago in Antarctica. It's actually cooled since that time. And all the while, IPCC keeps screaming, it's CO2, it's CO2, you're making the planet warmer. So let's look at some of the forecasts going out. The minimum that we are going into right now, and this is why the weather is so mixed up and so strange and getting more intensely mixed up as we move forward month to month, is because we're dropping back into another Maunder minimum, if not something even stronger on a longer cyclical, more powerful pattern. At the least, we are going into a Maunder minimum type cooling, which would not have seen any types of weather like this for over 400 years. And Dr. Abutamatov at the Pukovo Astronomical Observatory in Russia, same forecast. The Russians are ahead of this. They have been putting out forecast upon forecast. And if we look at the heartbeat of the sun from the principal component analysis, this is all about magnetic canceling waves on the sun. Russian scientists Zarkova, Zarkov, Popov, and Shepard. This maps out prior cycles, and you can see clearly where we are dropping down into. Let me wide out on that a little bit for you. We are taking a step down from this black circle into something that will be very similar to the 1600s Maunder minimum starting right now. And it is going to be a quick and drastic step down. We're going to descend down into something that would be the equivalent of temperatures in the 1600s within the next 8 years. The forecast is right here for you. Now, when we take a look at different periods of time on the exit and entry into these grand solar minimums, the above chart runs over 200 years of time from 1550 to 1750. The bottom chart covers 400 years, a little bit longer time frame. But the entry into this grand solar minimum is much, much faster than it was back in the early 1600s, which gave them a little more time to adapt to the changing conditions in agriculture. And wherever you look, whether it be sunspot areas on the solar rotation, down. And you can understand why China is pushing for this digitization of assets. This will include your food supply. Absolutely. This thing, I believe, is made for food supply. They're running it as a test, if you will, for tea, so it doesn't seem too obtrusive and scary. If I tell you I'm going to come in and take your wheat supply and I'm going to digitize it, how would you feel about that? Tea, that doesn't scare you. So I made this chart myself. I overlaid the collapse of Chinese dynasties on top of the grand solar minimums. And you can pretty clearly see that even the Mongol invasions were spurred on and started due to some feedback loop inside a grand solar minimum that forced them to go look to different areas for food. Yuan dynasty collapses, and then Zheng He is out on explorations when they thought the next grand solar minimum was commencing in the early 1400s. And then we got the Ming dynasty collapsing, and then we also have the Qing dynasty, and the problems associated with that and the great famines. So when you start to take a look at the expected temperature drop by continent during these grand solar minimums, you can see Northern Asia pushing down into that Heilongjiang and the Neimenggu and the Menggu area. Of course, it's going to be dropping in temperature. There's going to be loss of food production. That's Heilongjiang is the northern area, and Inner Mongolia, Mongolia. This was the Maunder minimum changes. But when you look at the temperature change drops on the areas on our planet with that really dark blue where we grow our crops right now, specifically wheat, anywhere it's dark blue, that's a total loss. It's not going to be plantable, harvestable, or growable during these next 15 years. So we look out at the solar activity forecast for cycle 25 and 26. The intensification should increase with the decrease in the solar output. So if we are going to look and really see if this is happening, okay, IPCC says everything's warming and there's going to be feedback loops. All right, Greenland this year set the July temperature for the coldest reported temperature ever in the northern hemisphere in July at minus 33 degrees Celsius. Now, last year they also hit that same mark for minus 31 degrees Celsius. So what are the chances that 2 years in a row they break their own record for the coldest temperature ever recorded in central Greenland at Summon Station? Also this year, mass budget, increasing record ice, which nobody really talks about. They always like to talk about how the periphery's melting. They never talk about the ice budget itself. It's always got to be melting. Well, why discount and not talk about and sweep under the rug the record ice growth this year that completely bucks any of the patterns that the IPCC is claiming? And Dr. Roy Spencer's site here, taking a look at the UAH temperatures, we're only at 0.21 above baseline. Hey, I thought we were going to warm to like 2 degrees Celsius or something. That's 10 times lower than the IPCC said. And if we look year upon year, 2016 in the blue box compared to 2017, and these are by global, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, and the tropics, you can see the temperature is dropping in certain areas of the planet. Also, another anomalous fact they don't put in the newspapers often, 1971 sea ice is eclipsed by 2017 sea ice, but they'll rattle off into something about, well, it's a thickness, it's not the actual coverage. But wait a second, 2 years ago they were just talking about the coverage, and now it's the thickness because coverage overtakes, and now they have to make new excuses why. Let's look on some longer time scales here. We say the same thing again, just in a different form from different researchers put in that shows prior different areas of the globe were cooler or warmer than they are today. So I like to look at cycles. I like numbers. Longer term cycles, we got the Gleisberg cycle, we got the 102-year maximum cycle, and then what's funny is when you stack on top of each other, you get John Casey's RC cycle. Then when we put 5 of those 205-year cycles together, we get one eddy cycle we get an eddy cycle at 1,025 years. And then you multiply that by 5 again, and we come to 5,125. Gee, where have I seen that number before? Those are the ancient traditions that we talk about. And now we're talking about stacking 5s up to 25,650, up to 100,000 in the glaciation cycles. There's more powerful cycles at work here. And if you like stacking numbers and running them out, why don't we talk about planetary geometry and falls in temperature? Let's go further back in time. Chinese Wei dynasty collapsed 580 AD. This is a late antique little ice age. So China's understanding and historical records are vast. They have thousands of years of climate data. They know what's coming again. That's why they are trying to put everything into a digital format so it can be moved with their new currency that they're going to control. And they are also going to control the entire platform around it. Let's look at the planetary geometry here. When you get into that parallel set of the Jovians and the Earth all on the same side, 578 AD is a good example, and 2024, we're getting right into the same planetary geometry. So let's take a look here a little bit closer in so you can see it. Now, if you're not familiar with the outer planets, they're also termed as the Jovians. And when they go in these parallel sets and the Earth is sandwiched between, orbits slightly pulled out, and when this happens, there's different effects magnetically, coupling with the sun, which also has these changes in our jet streams, and this is what affects all the crop production. And then if we jump back another 500 years, we find a similar pattern in 79 AD, which we're going to repeat here in 2024. And if you don't like visuals, okay, let's move over into a graph where they actually plotted these Jovians, and you can see clearly that it's a repeating pattern that's measurable. Top line, Maunder minimum. Middle line, Dalton minimum. Bottom line, green arrow, our current time frame. We are entering a grand solar minimum. Now, when we look back at historical droughts during these same times, let's focus on Asia. Where would you not be able to grow crops from 1636 to 1641? The same area in Heilongjiang that's about to experience cold. Not only are they going to experience cold, but they're going to experience drought on top as well. And then suddenly the light bulb goes on, and North Korea is revamping its agriculture right now, isn't it? Oh yeah, they must see the same thing. Repeating cycles in history. Moving back to China, warm weather crops such as oranges were abandoned in Jiangxi province where they grew for centuries, but the grand solar minimum made it so cold and so wet that they had to abandon growing oranges there. Pakistan became cooler, mass migrations at that time out of the Indus Valley, Punjab as well. We are repeating cycles. You can expect the exact same thing happen again. Let's look at longer cycles. This is John Casey's 206-year RC, and we can see smaller cycles coupled within that on the Gleisberg cycles, and within that there's also a 50-year cycle. So we have cycles laying on top of cycles on top of cycles. But when it comes down to the magnetic electrical effects from the sun coupling with the earth changing our jet streams, this is how the intertropical convergent zone displaces during these grand solar minimums. So literally the flow of water across the planet is going to be disrupted and moved into different places. Have you noticed how many floods there are in these last few years that are the 100-year flood, the 1,000-year flood, the 500-year flood? And then there's droughts in some areas that are just unprecedented. That's because the rain belts are shifting across the planet, which they have before. These cloud belts move. Atmospheric circulation moves. The polar high is not a polar high anymore. That's why you get these Arctic tongues coming down. What do they call them? Polar vortexes. Everything you see on this schematic is outdated. This new grand solar minimum is going to skew this so badly that we're going to get into something like this as our regular pattern, where you're going to get these locking highs that force everything else down and out of place. And when you look at tropical rainfall over the last 2 millennia, you start to see the same thing. These undulations around China, specifically where it became wetter and drier. Hence, their agriculture is going to be affected. But they are one of the major importers on this planet. Now, without enough food to feed their people, there's going to be riots in the street. There's already such a disparage between the haves and the have-nots due to the economic boom over the last 20 years. There's a division in society. It's just barely under the surface, and the only reason it's kept in check is because the hard hand with that military and the government keeping that in check. Hard-hitting stick mentality is lifted off of there. Watch that place explode. And they're not going to be able to maintain control if food prices rise, and even the well-to-do and middle class are just gouged by food prices. That's going to double or triple and then take all that money out of the disposable economy there as well. And you'll start to see why they want to control food and digitize everything. South America during the grand solar minimums, not immune either. But for those of you who believe in CO2 warming, I would like to point out that the medieval warming period was warmer than today's temperatures. We are out of time. We have lost decades to prepare by this myth of CO2 that's been pushed for so long. But now there's so much counter information coming out showing you the truth that it's becoming a tidal wave now. By next year, grand solar minimum is going to be a lexicon used through search engines across this planet that will eclipse anything CO2-based warming. 2019, for sure, you're going to have kindergarten kids going, grand solar minimum, guaranteed. Now, another in the feedback loop is cosmic ray density increases. It's been proven time and time again through CERN and also Heinrich Svensmark, the pioneer in this field of study. The Cloud Mystery, available free on YouTube. I highly encourage you to watch this. It will explain everything in such easy to understand terms. You'll understand how cosmic rays form more clouds. And if we take a look at solar cycle 24 compared with the last 150 years of cycles, it is at the lowest, which would be also the inverse. The galactic cosmic rays are increasing to the highest. And when we overlay these two, there's a direct inverse relationship between the two. And as we enter this grand solar minimum, we are going to eclipse this by such a great magnitude. Our magnetosphere is directly connected to the sun. And as the sun decreases in its power output state magnetically and electrical coupling with our Earth, and the field-aligned currents that power this whole system, we're going to step down as well. These patterns of shift within our atmosphere, these out-of-season storms, are going to be the norm. And with the decrease in the solar wind pressure, there's just so many effects on our planet. This explains everything, not CO2. Then the forecast for cloud formation and galactic cosmic rays is 19% higher than the last solar cycle. New England already at plus 19%. This is just going to keep increasing and increasing in the amount of cloud cover and strange storms and thousand-year floods. And I'm waiting for this winter. There is going to be some place where it dumps out an atmospheric compression event blizzard that is going to bury a town in 15 feet of snow. No kidding. There's going to be one of these events that is going to bury a town. This is the type of precipitation that's going to be ringing out of the atmosphere. And now that scientists are not so afraid to speak out as they were 10 years ago with the IPCC's witch hunts going on. So the CMIP6 run on a deep maximum. Look at the galactic cosmic ray increases. That is startling. That should scare you when you see this chart. That is so much cloud cover that it alone could drop global temperatures. And the amount of rainfall coming out of there would wipe out our crops. Systems for drainage are not going to be able to handle this. Now, if it is electromagnetic interaction of our sun on the planet and not CO2, we should start to see the same effects happening to other planets as well, where there's no cars or factories up there. Neptune, look at the energetic exchange happening. This is the same thing. They're talking about more ferocious and fierce storms. What do you think's happening on Neptune? Let's look at all the Jovians here. Saturn on the left. Look at the poles. Look at Jupiter. Neptune and Uranus, they're all electrically different right now. This is what's happening to our Earth as well. Do you think they're not also experiencing strange weather on these other planets that's completely out of sync? And then we come back to our own Earth here. Now we're starting to see electrical phenomenon in the sky as there tried to be an equalization between polarization charges. Red jellyfish sprites, which used to be rare, now being captured regularly by amateur photographers. And we should start to see more and more of these increasing as well in intensity and brightness and length of duration. Which brings us right back into the thunderbolts. They were predicting we would start to see stuff like this and symbols of an ancient sky, that what they talked about in myth and legend and what has been left in stone carvings and stele and all these temple motifs about thunderbolts and gods in the sky and lightning bolts and lightning bolt arrows and all these things plasma. They predicted we would start to see the same thing again as we entered into a lessened state of solar activity. And what did we get over Australia last month? The exact same things that we start to see in Assyrian as well as Indian temple reliefs. Steve, a new type of proton arc never discovered or seen before. Not only was it seen once, it was seen twice this year, a month apart. So this is a visualization of the canceling waves on the sun, which are going to usher in this grand solar minimum. Over in cycle 25 and 26, you see how they're opposite and they're canceling each other. Let's just go back in shorter duration, 40 years of time, the last solar cycle comparison, our solar cycle 24, far below anything else in that time frame. What about this 50-year cycle? Double typhoons just passed over Taiwan 2 weeks ago. Nisat and Haitang. When's the last time that occurred? 1967. So you can expect to see a repeat of 1967 weather at the bare minimum wherever you live. Look for climate information for 1967 in your local area, and I'm pretty sure that you're going to repeat something like that, but a little more intense because these cycles are overlapping on top of each other. We got the 50 and the minimum, the 206-year overlapping right now. And I'm going to say also the eddies on top of that with the 1,000-year cyclical. And Maurice Cottrell's 3,740-year cycle, I say we're getting a blend of all four on top of each other on this more powerful coupling of cycles. And it all comes back to the food. If you don't eat, you want regime change. If you don't eat, you become angry and unpredictable. If you don't eat, you have nothing left to lose. And desperate people do desperate things. Hard winter red, down to 743 million bushels from 1 billion bushels. That's a 298 million bushel difference. That's 25% less. And then the Kansas winter wheat was wiped out through that late season blizzard. That's a 35% decrease minimum on the Kansas wheat. But remember, since it was so stressed, the protein content is not going to be the same. So it might take 1.2 tons to equal the same protein amount in what was previously 1 ton of wheat. So don't just say it's 1 ton any longer. The stress on the plants going from hot to cold and out of season blizzards and ice, and then they try to regrow after that. In this maturation process, those seeds are smaller and they're very different in the amount of nutrition content. USDA putting wheat plantings smallest since 1919 as farmers try to switch to other crops. And then we're getting frozen corn in the fields. June 27th, frozen solid corn, and then this is what it looks like in a lot of areas. Now granted, some areas are thriving with plentiful rainfall, but there's so many areas that are in drought. Also in Canada, they stranded over 1 million tons of canola in the fields. Now I wanted to get back into the feedback loop also with the cosmic rays. There seemed to be some correlation of volcanic eruptions during many ice ages or grand solar minimums. 1258, that was the Southern Song that finished at that time. The Jin dynasty as well, around 1200. 1450, that's where they sent out Zhenghua to look for other alternative trade because they thought another grand solar minimum was starting because the Yuan dynasty was just re-emerging after their collapse from drought in 1380. Then we get into the year without a summer, and you got the Ming Dynasty collapse around 1600. There's just more volcanic ash in the air that's also coupling with cloud cover, and that albedo effect is tremendous. Now think about this. The year without a summer, this is the Dalton minimum. That Tambora eruption cooled Europe this much that their crops were wiped out. And you know for sure around Asia the same thing happened. I mean, that eruption took place in Asia. And then South America also was very discernible in the amount of lost production from the single eruption. And then case in point, the Pinatubo eruption. That was in the Philippines in the 1990s. That single eruption cooled North America, parts of Asia, and parts of Europe up to 2°C off a single one eruption. Now what happens when we get something that's more powerful? A VEI 7 versus a VEI 6. The amount of ash going in the atmosphere on a Tambora-style eruption. And the most important point to get to with this intertropical convergence zone shift, I want you to notice where the low GCR flux is compared to the high GCR and how this moves south. This is going to draw the moisture with it, drying out areas north of that red line. Let's look here. The forecast is everything 45 north and above is going to go completely offline. So this is going to take out all of Heilongjiang, parts of Inner Mongolia. North Korea is going to be ruined. And then we just need to go around the world. Most, if not all, of Canada and anything in the Dakotas growing areas in the periphery. Then we take a look over into Europe, and Russia's going to have a very difficult time in the Ural Mountains areas, Kazakhstan. But think about all of these areas going offline. What is it going to do to the global commodities prices? Food's going to be unavailable in some areas. There were global famines in the 1600s. There were global famines in the 1300s. 10% of the world's population died of disease and starvation in the 1800s during the Dalton minimum. Chinese dynasties collapse every single time one of these rolls around. So they are absolutely trying to protect themselves this time. But here's the timeline going out for you. How fast does this need to occur, the transition to digital currency? Well, we already looked at this one slide here of how fast we're going to descend into the mini ice age. Let's break it apart here and show the amplification between years stepping forward into time. Now, everything needs to be set and in place before 2021. After that point, if the cryptocurrency economy is not set, it never will be. There's a race against the clock and race against amplification and race against food price increases to get everything set. So as we move in to 2016 and 17, you've already seen an enormous amount of amplification and weather effects. 2017, 18, it's been a ramp up, and you have noticed absolutely there's been a ramp up in strangeness, specifically vortices events, spinning winds, tornadoes, wind in general, and rain, downbursts, sidebursts, whatever you like to call it. There's been an amplification. That's nothing compared to what's coming over the 2018 and 19 amplification. It's going to be a 4 times amplification over these last 2 years. And then it's going to amplify again as we go from 2019 to 2020. Now, what I want to draw your attention to is cryptocurrency market capitalizations locking step for step with the increases in the amplification of the grand solar minimum weather patterns. So all that change we've seen from 2016-17 is the ramp up in cryptocurrency going from $5 for Ether all the way up to 400, and then Bitcoin, around 1,000, going up to 4,000, and it's just seen it time and time again, everything exploding. Keeping pace moving into the end of 2017 into 2018, there's going to be an incredible increase in market cap for cryptocurrency. I'm putting my forecast out around $400 billion by 2018, and as we get into 2018 and 19, that's going to ramp up 4 or 5 times that. But as more people get on board, there could be an exponential increase that I'm not factoring in. But what I am factoring in is spot returns on La Nina. Now, if you think La Nina, that is going to be a baby push in weather compared to what's about to happen. So when we start to look at the global crops that are most affected during cooler, wetter periods, wheat is one of those. So you would expect wheat to start rising in price right away. Soybeans as well. And isn't it interesting how China bought almost the entire U.S. soybean crop for 2017 to import back to China this year? Now, I wonder if they're going to digitize that and store it in warehouses inside China, because at the rate they're going off the AC chain, that's exactly what I would do. Is every time I get grain, lumber, or whatever it is that's in access sitting around in China that they're not able to sell on the market, and there's a glut of a lot of stuff, why not digitize it and let everybody take ownership of it? So when it increases in price later on, people will be able to use the increase in that to then restart the economy again in the local area or the country that's issuing that coin or the token. When we talk about rising food prices, those of you who lived through 2008 and 9, which we all did, we saw that massive run up in oil prices, we saw the massive run up in everything prices. Silver, gold, grains, you name it, it was up and then it crashed. Food prices. People pulled out of their disposable spending because fuel cost more money at that time, as well as everything else. The spending habits changed a lot. Local businesses suffered, and this is nothing, I mean nothing to what's coming, because in 2008 and 9, you could shift spending habits, you could carpool with people, you could drive less, you could work from home, you could do a lot of other things to try to minimize expenses based on passed down costs on rising fuel prices. But this time, it's different. It's based on food price increases and yield decreases in the grand solar minimum. Everybody eats every day. There's no way to escape at this time. There's no way to shift your spending pattern away from food. This is absolutely going to pull out of the economy, and this is what's going to collapse at this time. When food doubles or triples in price, there's no way the economy can survive. All that extra money that would be spent out in the economy is rediverted into food. Also another prediction, by 2020, America will have totally done away with all these mandated ethanol fuels because we look at it, question, food or fuel. Riots on the streets, people protesting every day, severe social unrest based on food prices. You're not going to be diverting that over into the gas tank. They're going to try to get every farmer to use every single square inch of arable land within the United States to try to feed its citizens. And so will every other country. But they're going to have to battle with the changing weather patterns, the out-of-season storms that are going to decimate crops, cold weather when it should be warm. It's going to be just a difficult time keeping up any types of yield coming out of our traditional grow zones. Hence, the underlying assets. If the global economy has crashed and the fiat currency is no longer accepted or believed in and the entire confidence is gone out of that system, are you really going to send your 60,000 tons of wheat over in a ship to another country on an LC through a sketchy bank that may or may not pay you? I guarantee you will not. You're going to move over into a smart contract where that money's locked in before that thing leaves port. And if you think hyperinflation can't happen anywhere in the world, it can, and it will. And the only way to protect yourself, it won't matter if that's a US dollar, if your underlying asset's either a Bitcoin or Ethereum Classic, or Monero, or whatever it is, Dash or Dogecoin, I don't care what you're holding. That paper money is meaningless to you because your value is stored in a different asset that's tradable. So why would you even look at the dollar value of it? Because it doesn't have anything to do with dollars anymore. It'll be a tradable asset amongst peers in its own ecosystem of value. Let's go back to 2008 and 9 for a moment. Average spending on the left side, U.S. consumers were pushing about $110 a day. After the crash, they were pushing less than $60. So moving out, let's say the average spending $60 today, because I know the economy has not recovered as reported in the media across most of the globe. So we'll peg it at $60. Now, if you drop another $50 off of that, you're telling me the average daily spending for Americans is going to be $10? So my question is, truly, the whole video is focusing on when will these grain harvests start to be digitized and move through smart contracts? And as I see it, there will be an asset class for every investor with an ICO token coin for every size of deliverable agricultural commodity. From this 60 kg bag here to the barge size. And what about multiple barges and the 60,000 ton breakbark vessels? Each one of these cargo capacity will have a different coin associated with its volume, and whether it be corn or soy or oats or millet or sorghum or cooking oils or whatever it is, you see the future. And when I really wasn't joking when I was talking about there's probably going to be a 2019 USA wheat coin created to digitize part of the 2019 harvest. It's going to come that fast. So it all comes down to the global acceptance of this digital currency. It is so early right now. Only the bravest and what people might be considered innovators are in it at the moment. There's less than 2% of the global population even knows what this stuff is, how to get into it, how to even buy it, how to trade it. They don't even know the names except for Bitcoin, and maybe you might know Ethereum or Litecoin, maybe. Even know what a Trezor wallet is. If you say Trezor, they think you're talking about a planet somewhere else. So how do you get people to accept it? First, you're going to run the news to death with Bitcoin surging in price. It was $3,200 after the fork. Bitcoin Cash also surged in price. Now Bitcoin today, $4,200. Watch how the news media runs with it. And then they need to get you to get into a debit card. We all accept debit cards. You shift sideways, cryptocurrency debit card. And also if you're going to want to send money, you're going to have to make it incredibly easy. We're going to have to put it into a word form.eth as an address so I can send you money or receive it. And we look at the Bitcoin capitalization itself, 43 billion. And wherever you look in these charts, CoinMarketCap or Polonia, Bittrex, whatever you want to use for your trading platform, it just shows the same upward trend. It was hundreds of % gain on every single ICO and coin that was out on the market. That's captured a lot of people's attention. And now they're talking about it, mainstream moment for Bitcoin here as it gains public acceptance from 1% of the population or even 0.03% of the population. Imagine if it's at this price at $4,000 and there's less than 1% of the population in on it. There's 99% of others that need to put their money into it. What do you think the value of one of those is going to be at the end of the run when 100% of the globe moves into digital currency? It's going to go lockstep right here with this grand solar minimum forecast. So you can see where most of the upward momentum is going to take place. There's going to be a giant shift in 2018. You're going to need to include central banks. Now Korea is in the supernode for blockchain. And they're also coupling with AC Chain. And then we get the Japanese government legalizing Bitcoin. And they're also putting AC Chain on their exchanges. Now we got the Ukraine. We got India. Crypto derivatives. Got digital asset investments. Australia is getting in on it with the Bitcoin exchanges, Series A funding. Hedge funds now. So all these mainstream instruments for investment that we're used to hearing about in the traditional stock markets are just moving over. They seem so much more safe when you term it something different. The SEC is cracking down on ICOs. So for the average citizen, wow, the SEC is involved. It must be much safer now. All these global financial service companies have been in since 2015, and you're just hearing about it, how safe it's getting now. They have a 2-year head start on you. And these are major players here. For the CME Group's the one that catches my attention out of most of that. And if you haven't dug into the Ethereum Alliance, this is a corporate settlement instrument that they're working on to work between themselves using digital currency for settlement. That's not the sovereign or the international settlement instrument. And as more of this gets into the mainstream media, now they're offering MasterCard and debit cards with crypto, and it's making it easier to get into the exchanges and allow Bitcoin Cash withdrawals off a debit card. Once this happens, there'll be really mainstream acceptance. Oh, wow, I can just put my money in a different place that's safer, and I can still get it out with an ATM card. Awesome, I will get into that. And all these debit cards becoming so mainstream now. There's even ICOs for these types of cards with Monaco. You got Dash, 10X, BitPay with a Visa, Shift with a Visa for Americans. And even more regulatory news coming out. It's going to appear much safer. Now they closed down BTC exchange. Oh, those bad people on the dark web. Ooh, look how safe it is now. Put your money in. We're closing down all the nastiness, taking out all the ICOs, going to regulate those, close down exchanges. Your money is much safer. Now please put it in. NASDAQ going on to the blockchain along with New York Stock Exchange. Once these two major exchanges hit that, it's over. It'll be full acceptance of the global population. We'll jump into it, especially if we get over into Bank of England. Dare say, are they also involved? Then these new stories coming out, how to mine Bitcoin, and then, whoa, there's 21 Inc. put a Bitcoin mining device on your new iPhones. Oh, well, it's only to mine smart contracts. Interesting how those couple together. And now, what's termed Enigma Catalyst is going to usher in micro crypto funds. So any of those unbanked people on the planet that live on $2 a day, you're welcome also in the new scheme of things. We have a fund just for you, a coin just for you. It's a micro crypto fund. Now, the last thing is going to be how to send it to people. If you can't send it and it's difficult to understand, nobody's going to use it. So let's simplify it. Ethereum name service. And if you haven't heard of this, it's the way that you change your Ether address, which is the 30-digit numeral and alphabet code, which is difficult. You make one mistake on your private key or your address, and your money's gone to another person. We're all familiar with .net, .org, .com. Let's change that into .eth. Now it's human readable, so wallet.eth, that's easy. And then you can create a subdomain off of that as well, like nick.wallet.eth. So what about your family? Shirley.eth. And then you can put your son or your daughter in there, son.shirley.eth, daughter.shirley.eth. And all these subdomains can be just run out as well. If you own the .eth address, if you didn't get on that, the auction started several months ago. And when we talk about digitizing all assets and everything on this planet, it can be encompassed in this diagram right here. From money to energy to art to videos to IP to labor to commodities and anything in between can now be digitized, commoditized in a coin issued for an ICO on the value on that. And my whole thing is, when are they going to start digitizing people? Because your labor is also value that they can issue a coin on. We're going to issue a coin based on a country's workforce. Japan worker token. What, are you going to jump in on that? They're going to do the productivity of the Japanese economy based on hours worked or something, or monies earned? That's where it's going, though. And then we come to Libor. Going to be phased out by 2021. Isn't that convenient that they need to have everything in place by 2021? Where do you think that $350 trillion in securities and derivatives is going to make its way into? Do you think that's going to dissolve into nothing? Are you kidding me? That's just going to slide sideways right into cryptocurrency. And when 350 trillion gets put in there, Bitcoins are going to be well over $1 million US. And there'll be so many altcoins built off of this as well. I could see in the future hundreds of thousands of altcoins with all these ICOs. Now, Bank of England, proof of concept using Ripple with the 350 trillion in securities that they need to move somewhere. Because some of these derivative contracts are going to settle past the 2021 date, that's going to put everything in limbo. They're going to have a different system to settle it. So you can see at least a large portion of that 350 trillion moving over into digital currency space. It's about China trying to build out these quantum communications networks. The actual global distribution, usage, and security for cryptocurrency transactions in our daily lives can be implemented. And then the PBOC is going to start its own UN replacement coin. And then you have NEO coming in, and then they're digitizing all the actual physical assets. And you can see the timeline they're racing against. And you can also see how much money is going to flow into this whole digital currency space just using the grand solar minimum forecast. Food prices are going to increase, social unrest, and they're trying to avoid that the best they can. And also think about the investments into food growing. We're going to need to move a lot of food indoors with LED growing systems, shifting of agricultural zones, different kind of seeds that will be more hardy in the new climate. We'll have to finance new machinery, new seeds, whole new distribution chains in agriculture. This can all be done if there's actually value somewhere. But using a fiat dollar or a fiat euro in the future as everything's collapsing around, it's not going to work. There has to be value somewhere that people perceive as value. And it's just going to be this. I so clearly see it into the future that I see this movie playing out before me. This is how it is going to move. So as the second amplification occurs from 2018 and 19 and the weather change on the grand solar minimum, also there should be at least a 4x or a 16x increase in cryptocurrency valuation. And as the more expensive food becomes, the more money will also go into the crypto space. So if you're in now, you're in early, you're going to be a multimillionaire, if not billionaire, by the time this runs its course into 2025. And then more news coming out just a couple days ago. Coinbase just raised another $100 million US. Now Coinbase, being a Coinbase customer with terrible customer support, having problems with two-factor identification, 8 tickets in trying to solve a problem with you all, you absolutely need to improve your customer service. It's horrible. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. Our lives are going to be so drastically different, so very, very different from this point forward. I hope you can adapt to change, because that's all it's going to be from this point forward, is changing. Non-stop, continuous, metamorphic, ground-shaking, inconceivable changes, and you're going to have to roll with it. And I hope this gives you a head start of where it's going, so you can position yourself correctly to benefit off this. You should be thriving during this time. You should not be a pauper at the end of this time. With this information that you just watched this video, you need to be coming out of the backside of this a multimillionaire and helping others along the way too. That's the whole point. Just don't go in it all greedy and try to get as much as you can and leave everybody in the dust. Bring people along with you. Help people along the way. There's going to be a lot of mental breakdowns during this time. There's going to be such a high suicide rate during this time. You need to explain to people what's going on, that it cycles in the sun, not to worry about their wealth. There's other ways to preserve wealth, and not to worry about the food. You can grow your own food. You can work with your community. You know it's coming, so you can start to prepare right now in advance for all these changes. And on a last note, with the world in such disarray right now economically, and you can see governments spending so carelessly and recklessly, and you look at it and go, they're using no common sense. It's impossible what they're doing. How do they expect to pay anything back? They never will. They won't. They don't intend to. And all your retirement savings that's locked up into this system is absolutely going to vanish. And speaking of those using digital platforms, thank you so much, Daniel, Kristen, and Tom, for your contributions through paypal.me/adapt2030. I've also listed my cryptocurrency deposit addresses below, so if you feel you found this video informative in some way that can help you benefit through the future, please consider Patreon or a cryptocurrency deposit.